Years ago, a 4-year-old boy named Noah Carter walked out the back door of his family's farmhouse in Briar Creek, Iowa, and vanished before his mother could set down her dish towel. He was wearing a red flannel shirt. He had mud on his boots from the morning's rain, and by the time his mother reached the back porch and called his name, the only answer was the sound of wind moving through the cornfields. Authorities at the time believed Noah had wandered off, a toddler lost in the rows, taken by the river, claimed by accident. His family believed something else entirely, something darker, something they could never prove. Then, nearly half a century later, a retired schoolteacher in Tucson, Arizona, submitted a home DNA kit to an ancestry website, the same kind ordinary people use to find out if they're part Irish or descended from someone famous, and the results came back with a connection that nobody was prepared for. A connection that would finally put a name to a man who had been living under someone else's for 49 years. But to understand what that name meant and what its recovery cost, you first have to understand who Noah Carter was. And you have to understand Briar Creek, Iowa in the summer of 1975, because the town that lost him was not the kind of town that forgot. Briar Creek sat in the flat heart of Hardin County, population just under 2,000, the kind of place where the grain elevator was the tallest building and the diner on Elm Street had been run by the same family since 1948. In the summer of 1975, the town smelled like cut grass and diesel from the combines, and on Saturday evenings the men gathered at Dellinger's Hardware to talk about the price of corn and the Iowa State football prospects, and the women brought casseroles to anyone who was sick or grieving without being asked. Life moved at the pace of seasons there. Everyone knew the Carters. Raymond Carter farmed 280 acres of soybeans and corn on the eastern edge of town, the same land his father had worked before him. His wife, Dorothy, taught Sunday school at First Methodist and was known throughout Hardin County for a lemon pound cake she brought to every church potluck without fail. They had 3 children. The oldest, Gary, was 9. The middle child, Linda, was 6, and the youngest was Noah, 4 years old, small for his age, with his mother's dark eyes and a habit of collecting smooth stones from the creek bed and arranging them in rows along the back porch railing. His father called him the family's foreman. His sister Linda said he always laughed before the joke was even finished. He had not yet started kindergarten. He still slept with a stuffed rabbit named Earl. That last normal morning, the morning of July 14, 1975, Dorothy Carter had been washing the breakfast dishes while the 3 children played in the backyard. Gary and Linda were chasing each other around the old oak tree. Noah was at the edge of the yard near the equipment shed, crouching over something in the grass. Probably another stone. Dorothy would tell investigators later that she had looked out the kitchen window and seen him there at 9:47 in the morning. She was certain of the time because the local radio station was reading out grain prices, and she always listened to the 9:45 report while she cleaned up after breakfast. She looked out at Noah. She looked back down at the sink, and when she looked up again, he was gone. She called his name twice. She dried her hands and went to the back door. She called again. Gary and Linda stopped running and looked at her, then looked at the place where Noah had been. The yard was empty. The stones on the porch railing were exactly as he had left them, 7 of them, in a line, lightest to darkest. Dorothy walked to the equipment shed. She walked the fence line. She called his name until her voice changed. She was running by 10 o'clock. Raymond was in the south field when he heard her. By 10:15, he had driven the truck to the house, confirmed that Noah was nowhere on the property, and called the Hardin County Sheriff's Office from the rotary phone in the kitchen. Deputy Harlan Gibbs arrived at 10:40. The first county search was organized before noon. 40 volunteers walked the fields that afternoon. They walked the tree line bordering the creek. They dragged the shallower stretches of Briar Creek itself, something that would stay with Dorothy Carter for years, the image of men she knew from church wading in brown water with poles. The search turned up nothing. No small red flannel shirt, no tracks beyond the yard, no sign that Noah had gone anywhere under his own power or anyone else's. By Friday, 3 days in, the FBI field office in Des Moines had been contacted. By Saturday, Noah Carter's photograph, a school photo from the previous year, his dark eyes looking seriously at the camera, was on the front page of the Iowa Falls Citizen. By Sunday, the Carters' pastor said a prayer for Noah at both morning services, and the collection plate went to the family fund. The lead investigator assigned by the sheriff's office was Deputy Merle Hutchins, 41 years old. A quiet and methodical man who had spent 17 years working Hardin County cases and had never worked anything like this. Hutchins interviewed every neighbor within a 2-mile radius. He interviewed the men who had worked the fields adjacent to the Carter property. He checked the creek. He checked the roads. He made a note in his file about a green pickup truck, a Ford, late 60s model, that a farmhand named Denny Purvis had seen parked on the gravel road behind the Carter property the morning of July 14th. Denny hadn't thought much of it. People pulled over on gravel roads all the time. But Hutchins wrote it down. The truck was never identified. The primary suspect in the early weeks was a man named Gerald Floss, 28, who had worked a seasonal harvest contract on a neighboring farm and had a prior conviction in Nebraska for trespassing and a restraining order from an incident involving a child in Omaha. Hutchins brought Floss in twice. He had no alibi for the morning of July 14th, but he also had no physical evidence connecting him to the Carter property, and without more, the county prosecutor would not move forward. Floss left Iowa in September 1975 and was killed in a highway accident outside Lincoln, Nebraska in 1978. The case file noted his death with a single line. The question of the green Ford pickup was never resolved. Dorothy Carter did not believe Gerald Floss had taken her son. She never said why. She said it the way certain mothers say certain things, quietly and absolutely, without needing to defend it. Raymond Carter said very little publicly after the first month. He went back to the fields because there was nothing else to do, and the farm didn't stop for grief. Gary and Linda went back to school in September. The stones on the back porch railing stayed where Noah had put them. Dorothy wouldn't move them. She told her sister she moved them once to sweep and felt sick and put them all back exactly as they were. By 1978, 3 years after Noah disappeared, the case had effectively gone cold. Deputy Hutchins had retired. The file had been transferred to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation in Des Moines, where it sat among hundreds of other unresolved missing persons cases from the decade. The family had no new information. The reward fund, raised by the community to $2,000 in 1975, had never been claimed. The photograph on the diner bulletin board in Briar Creek had faded at the edges and been replaced twice. Dorothy always brought a fresh one, but the information never changed. Age 4. Missing since July 14, 1975, last seen wearing a red flannel shirt. By 1985, Noah would have been 14. Gary Carter was now in his 20s, married, farming the south half of his father's land. Linda had moved to Ames for college and come back to teach 4th grade at Briar Creek Elementary. Raymond Carter had a heart condition by then and walked more slowly through the rows. Dorothy still set a place for Noah at Christmas dinner. She said she didn't want to explain to anyone why she did it. She just did. By 1991, 16 years had passed. A private investigator hired briefly by a victims advocacy group out of Des Moines reviewed the case and noted the unidentified green pickup, the lack of forensic evidence, and the fact that no body had ever been recovered. He concluded his report by writing, "The absence of remains is not evidence of survival, but it is evidence of something." The report was filed. Nobody followed up. By 2001, Noah would have been 30. Raymond Carter died that March, a second heart attack, in the kitchen, at the table where Noah had eaten breakfast on the last morning anyone saw him. Dorothy sold the south field to Gary and stayed in the farmhouse. She kept the stones on the porch railing. She still filed annual inquiries with the Iowa DCI. She received form letters in response. She had been receiving form letters for 26 years. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together lives that deserved better. If this story matters to you, if you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. It helps more than you know. Now, let's get back to Dorothy Carter and the call she never stopped waiting for. The case had been cold for 49 years when it broke open, not through a tip, not through a new witness, not through the physical evidence that had always been so maddeningly thin. It broke open through a database and a woman in Tucson who had no idea what she was about to find. Her name was Barbara Holt. She was 63 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and she had submitted a consumer DNA kit to an ancestry website in the spring of 2024 because her daughter had given her one for Christmas and she'd been meaning to do it for months. The results came back in 6 weeks. Most of what she found was unremarkable, a stronger Scandinavian connection than she'd expected, some distant cousins in Minnesota. But one match stood out. A first-degree DNA connection to a man named Michael Holt, 60 years old, who had been living in Tucson for the past 22 years, and whom Barbara had always understood to be her younger brother. The problem was that Barbara Holt remembered very clearly the day her mother had brought Michael home. She remembered it because her mother had sat Barbara and her older sister down at the kitchen table and explained that Michael was adopted, that he had come from a difficult situation, and that they were never to ask about it, and never to tell anyone. Barbara had been 14. She had kept that secret for nearly 50 years. What the DNA result told her now was something different. The match was too strong. Michael Holt was not a distant relative. He was not an adoptee with unknown parentage. He was a blood relation, a first-degree match to Barbara herself, which meant her mother had not told her the truth about Michael Holt, and it meant Michael Holt had not told the truth to anyone. Barbara Holt contacted the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in May 2024. She submitted Michael's DNA through a genealogical investigator. The investigator cross-referenced the profile against the NAMOS database, the National Repository for Missing Persons and Unidentified Remains, and against Iowa DCI cold case records that had been uploaded as part of a 2019 digitization initiative. The process, which works by tracing shared DA markers through extended family trees and comparing against documented cases, took 11 days. On the morning of June 3, 2024, the investigator, a woman named Dana Chisholm, who had worked cold case genealogy for 7 years, was at her desk in Denver when the match came back. She looked at it for a long moment. She pulled the original case file. She looked at the photograph of a 4-year-old boy in a flannel shirt with dark eyes looking seriously at a camera. She picked up the phone and called the Iowa DCI. The call that reached Briar Creek came through Gary Carter's cell phone on a Thursday evening. Dorothy Carter was 83 years old by then, still in the farmhouse, still with the stones on the back porch railing. Gary drove over immediately. He sat down across from his mother at the kitchen table, the same kitchen, and told her that investigators believed they had found Noah, that he was alive, that he was 60 years old and living in Arizona and had spent his entire adult life not knowing his own name. Gary Carter would tell a reporter later that his mother didn't cry right away. She sat very still for a moment, and then she said, quietly, "I knew he wasn't in that creek." The man known as Michael Holt had lived his entire conscious life under a constructed identity. Records confirmed that he had been raised by Edna Holt, a widowed nurse who had moved to Tucson from the Midwest in the early 1980s and who had died in 2019 at the age of 91. Michael Holt had no birth certificate predating 1976. Investigators determined the document had been falsified, a practice that was significantly easier to accomplish in the pre-digital era, particularly for a child too young to remember a different name. He had a high school diploma, a community college degree in accounting, 30 years of tax records, and no criminal history. He had been, by all external measures, an ordinary man. He had no memory of Iowa. He had no memory of a farmhouse or a back porch or a row of smooth stones. Investigators from the Iowa DCI and Maricopa County traveled to Tucson in June 2024. They conducted a voluntary DNA collection. The results confirmed what the genealogical analysis had indicated. Michael Holt was Noah Carter. The woman who had taken him, Edna Holt, had died 5 years earlier, and with her any full accounting of what had happened on the gravel road behind the Carter property on the morning of July 14, 1975. Court documents later confirmed that investigators found among Edna Holt's personal effects a green Ford pickup truck, a 1968 model, rusted and inoperable, stored in a rented garage in a Phoenix suburb. The registration had been in the name of her deceased husband. She had kept it for 50 years. The green pickup truck that Denny Purvis had seen. The detail Merle Hutchins had written down and never been able to close. Noah Carter, the man who had lived as Michael Holt, met his sister Linda first in a conference room in Des Moines, arranged by Victim Services. Gary drove Dorothy to the meeting. She was 83 years old, and she walked with a cane. By the accounts of everyone present, she walked into that room and put her hand on her youngest son's face and stood there for a long time without speaking. Noah Carter did not remember her. He was 60 years old, and he did not remember her. But he said later in a statement released through his attorney that he had understood, in that moment, that he had been loved for his entire life by people he had no memory of, and that understanding had rearranged something in him that he did not yet have words for. The stones are still on the back porch railing. Dorothy moved back to the farmhouse after the visit. Linda told a reporter from the Iowa Falls Citizen that her mother slept well for the first time in years after Noah was found. Not because everything was resolved, because it wasn't, and it never entirely would be. But because the question that had consumed 49 years of a family's life had finally received its answer. He had not drowned in the creek. He had not been buried in the fields. He had been somewhere. He had been alive. And now he knew who he was. Noah Carter began meeting with a therapist in July 2024 to process what investigators had confirmed about his origins. He has not made public statements beyond the initial release. His relationship with his biological family is described by those close to the case as careful and developing, the way any relationship must be when it is built not on shared memory, but on shared blood and the long patience of people who never stopped believing. Edna Holt faced no legal consequences. She was already dead. There was no one to arrest. No courtroom. No sentence. The Iowa DCI confirmed the case was closed as resolved. The Hardin County Sheriff's Office issued a statement acknowledging the resolution of the 1975 disappearance and noting the role of genealogical DNA technology in recovering what 4 decades of traditional investigation had not been able to provide. What remains is this. A woman in Briar Creek, Iowa, kept 7 smooth stones on a back porch railing for 49 years. She moved them once and felt sick and put them back. She filed annual inquiries with a state office and received form letters. She set a place at Christmas dinner. She drove to Des Moines and walked into a conference room with a cane and put her hand on the face of a 60-year-old man she had last seen as a 4-year-old, crouching in the grass with mud on his boots, and she stood there until she was ready to let go. That is not a story about a cold case being solved. That is a story about what love looks like when it has no evidence to hold on to, and holds on anyway. How do you feel about a resolution where the person responsible never faced legal consequences? Is that justice or something else? What detail in this case surprised you most? The DNA match, the truck, or the stones? And what does it say about our systems of identification and protection that a child could be taken and raised under a false name for nearly 50 years without detection? Justice found Noah Carter after 49 years. Stories like his are why this channel exists. If you believe the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.